Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today in another Friday broadcast. Playing around with some name tags, they're incorrect, so I'm gonna move them as I introduce the people. So, in the bottom right corner, in the smallest picture ever, you have me, Alex Zlatin. Happy Friday to everyone who's watching. I'm CEO of Maxident, also Executive Director of the Dental Office Managers Association of Canada. And if you haven't participated in this broadcast before, we basically talk about things that we encounter throughout the week that we feel is beneficial for offices to know, and we share some details about it. So that's what we've been doing. Just next to me, bottom right, is Mike Jenson with the actual and proper name that you can see there. To the left of him, bottom left corner, is actually Noel. So I'm going to move his name to the proper location. And here we go. I'm also going to make it white because it is blue for some reason. So good stuff. Above Noel, we actually have James and not Jay. James Scott, who's our Western Canada account manager. And last but definitely not least is Jay Camet on the top right corner of your screen here. I'm actually going to move the name on top just because it's very bright, and this one is the one that I'm actually going to make blue. So today we have quite a few topics for you here. We want to, everyone's gearing up for reopening, and we want to make sure that everyone's taking into consideration everything that's going on. So I think we are just going to go ahead and start. Today we have Mike starting with the first topic, some news coming from Quebec that he'll touch upon, and some updates with regards to the pandemic. So go ahead, Mike.
Thanks, Alex. I hope everyone has been having a good week and has been doing well. Throughout the week, I've been reading about how Quebec is expanding the list of authorized health professionals allowed to administer the COVID-19 test. Well, who could test before and who can test now? Well, up until now, only doctors, nurses, and respiratory therapists have been allowed to administer the test. Starting though on May 18th, dentists, hygienists, dietitians, audiologists, and speech pathologists will now be allowed to administer the COVID-19 test as well. So why allow this now? Quebec is looking to achieve a target of 14,000 daily tests and believes that this list of health professionals is the way to do it. As of current, Quebec has been achieving roughly 10,000 daily tests, whereas Quebec does have a long-term goal to achieve a 30,000 daily tests, and this is just one step in getting to that long-term goal. So how can you start administering the test? The signed decree that was processed indicates that these professionals will have to undergo a training and screening provided in their health establishment. So as of this time, I couldn't find the information as to where you can apply for this training, though I imagine come May 18th, more information is going to be provided. As well, you can always contact your local health authority for more information pertaining to that. So, as Quebec is currently the epicenter of COVID, which could be due to the tightly knit community in Montreal and the lack of resources, they're working around the clock assessing the resources as chemical reagents, swabs, and personnel. Expanding the list of authorized health professionals is just one step in growing their resources to meet their long-term goal and target of the 30,000 daily tests. So that's been kind of the scoop in Quebec and what's been going on within the past week within there. So apparently from multiple articles that I've read, a lot of people are speculating that that will actually end up reaching the 14,000 daily tests and get them over that 10,000 marker just by allowing more health professionals to administer those tests. So that's all that I have.
Awesome stuff, Mike. Thanks. And I think it's very important that Quebec starts to do more testing. I think a lot of the tests that have been procured by the government have been sent over there. Speaking with dentists in the Montreal-Laval area, they're describing some extremely troubling and concerning situations that are happening there. Unfortunately, they're at a point where they have law enforcement blocking bridges, and it's been very difficult on the people living in those areas. So hopefully a little bit more testing, and then a little bit more social distancing or physical distancing, I guess. Hopefully we'll be able to help in that particular region. And as more and more provinces are starting to see some reopening standards. I've been speaking with a growing amount of hygienists, both independent, but both employees, actually more employees than independent, that have extreme concerns and anxiety with going back to practicing and reopening. I've been speaking with quite a few that have actually considered to pretty much refuse to come to work because they feel it's unsafe. And I've seen quite a few dentists that are not taking the new guidelines seriously and are just implementing the things that they feel is good. And so the concern from the hygienists and assistants, and actually some associates and even front staff, are legitimate. And at the end of the day, these concerns are going to trickle to the patients as well. But today, Noel is going to touch upon some guidelines that have been released by the CDHA with regards to preparation to return to work and seeing how that works. So Noel's going to touch base a little bit on that. Noel, take it away.
Thank you, Alex, and good day to everybody. And thank you for tuning in. Now, one of the I've been watching for the advisory from the CDHA websites, and I was so happy to see that there was an updates about reopening the clinic or something about the return to work guidelines, so some sort of like that. And one of the topics that I'd like to discuss is prior to reopening the offices, and the college is suggested to meet with the employers as well as the colleagues to determine what is the best strategy for return to work policy, like brainstorming or consultations with the colleague kind of thing. And one of the from the PPE supplies, PPE inventories, appointment management, and all that kind of stuff, like screening, assessment protocols, communicating your reopening to your clients are so much. I'm so much interested in that, and I would like to share my inputs on those kind of things, especially with the PPEs, inventory of the PPE, since we need this more than ever. Like, how would you replenish your supplies? How many stocks of masks? How many gloves do you have? Gowns and shields and all that kind of stuff. I know there will be difference in prices compared to prior to COVID pandemic. There will be absolutely price difference in there. Now, when like I said, there's so much usage of this PPEs, and I would say look into when is the next supplies coming in, and who are the suppliers involved, all the kind of stuff. Now, the other thing is, how would you observe the distancing measures protocol, or physical distancing protocol, I would say. This is for both clients and for both office staff. One of which that I'm very fond of is when you are at the grocery stores, there is a directional flow of traffic. So just to avoid the, uh, moving into multiple direction kind of thing. So from starting from I-1 going up to the counters, there are familiar or popular arrows on the floor that you can follow. And yeah, and also the screening or a um, risk management protocols. One of the office I spoke with, I think it was the other day or yesterday. Um, one of the questions he asked is, "Would you create me this kind of forms, like a screening forms that they can send it to the office or the patients prior to coming in?" And this is like a very good idea. So we can get this form created yourself. Like, have you questions such as, have you contacted with patients with suspected um, COVID or confirmed case, something like that? Have you been outside of the country? Have you been outside of the provinces? Or are you sick? Or you're having difficulties breathing? Those simple questions would answer yes or no to each particular questions will help you screen the patients before they coming in. So if those questions answer the questions are yes, so they have to stay home. They have to reschedule and all that. And also with how would you manage patients in waiting room? Should you allow patients to wait in the waiting room after, registering, say, "Hey, I'm here"? Should they wait in the waiting room? And one of the thing is, we were at the um, restaurant, or I mean, food chain early yesterday, and said, "You can stay here. You can stay in your car and come back after a few minutes." Which is, I think, you can adopt this as well to avoid this, this kind of prevent this diseases and all that kind of stuff. And also the how would you manage patient appointments? How long is the length of the appointments, and how many patients are you can you see for the day? Um, one of the things I would suggest is, you have to allow time in between patients, and this is for you to have sanitize the contact points, like the door handles, chairs, the countertops, and all that kind of stuff. And above all that, I would suggest to recommend to contact the regulatory bodies or the health experts in each province to get the updated infection protocols and standards. And that's it for me. And thank you for tuning in.
Great stuff, Noel. Thank you very much. And it's good that the regulatory bodies are coming up with some guidelines to help everyone who is trying to figure out what the day off is going to look like, and trying to make sure that everyone are kept safe. I think that's everyone's number one goal, and we're gonna have more on those topics by Jay and James. Patricia, who's our favorite viewer, is asking, how do you manage your deliveries from courier companies? And I think potentially James is going to touch upon that a little bit. But from my kind of biased or maybe unbiased opinion, I think you should treat those deliveries very similar to how I guess my wife treats deliveries from the grocery store. We take it all in through. If you have a back door, then that's good. If you don't, then take it through the only door that's available. Make sure you disinfect everything. Make sure that you treat all of the hard surfaces as if they are contaminated, and see if you can take things out of their original packaging if you're not able to disinfect that. But other than that, disinfect everything and make sure that you treat your own PPE like like the gloves that you're using as if they're contaminated. Um, Depending on what is being delivered, I think that changes a little bit of the protocols. But similar to how you would have protocols for the patients, you would have protocols for the couriers. So I think that's something that's also very important and need to make visible to them as you reopen. And I think that's actually a really good transit into our next topic, which I believe is going to be the next thing within our industry, but not only, also in the restaurant industry and other professional industries as well, is a topic on how to minimize all the touch points with hard surfaces. And Jay is going to be giving his opinion, his knowledge, his experience speaking with a lot of dentists and other various vendors. He's going to share what he knows. Go ahead, Jay. Take it off.
All right, thank you, Alex. So yeah, so just like what Alex said, we're going to touch on he mentioned the high touch surfaces or hard surfaces, right? But now in this context, we're gonna discuss in a dental office setting. Now, I'm not gonna go through. Don't worry, I'm not gonna bore you with the regular things that you guys hear with the IPC protocols. You guys have heard that, and Noel had touched on that as well earlier with some of those protocols. But these are things that we or most offices may have overlooked because they had prepared physically on, like, let's say, which is stage one, which is the entrance. I'm going to put plexiglass here. I'm going to close up the walls. But then the other things behind that, what are the other things that we need to consider? So first thing is, like, let's say your first contact with a patient. What's your first contact? Like a phone call. So that's fine. But then right now, a lot of offices we've talked to are asking and seeking assistance on how would they go about with having the patients fill out forms. Is there going to be a fillable form that you're going to send ahead of time? Are you going to incorporate this in your website? Are you going to have a kiosk in your waiting room? Things like that. These things needs to be addressed. So, for example, like when we're talking about like fillable forms online, we have to make sure that these information that you're filling out is secured, right? Because these are patient information, identifiable information that you're sending through the internet, right? Now, others would say, yeah, let's use an email, because an email, I have a password for my email. Nobody can intercept that. But then not necessarily, because email, there's different. Especially for the free email accounts, they're not totally secured because they go from one server to another until it reaches the recipient, and vice versa. So it can be intercepted, within that process. So we have to make sure that maybe you can source to looking into like a secured email or a secured shared site or a cloud site. Where you can share your form, or so these are the things that you just have to consider. Now, when I mentioned tablet earlier, for our own software, like it's capable of, which is Maxident, it's capable of being filled out in a tablet. So in a Windows-based tablet, so that's another option, because if you would go with a conventional way, you could still do that with a clipboard and a pen, but then there's going to be more time spent with you, with your receptionist, giving instructions on how to fill that out. Like just like when I was in Costco, I was buying a tire. Before they had me filled out a form, but before they handed me the clipboard and the pen, they gave me specific instructions, like, before you return this, fill it out. Before you return this to me, don't make sure that you're handing it to me. Don't put it in the hard surface, because what they had was they had wipes already to grab the pen and things like that. So if you're willing to do that, then good. But then you cannot really avoid getting bacteria or germs, or getting the paper fully disinfected, because you can't. How will you disinfect the paper, right? Then it'll just get it. You'll just get it wet. So going back to the tablet, you can you can use a tablet where after they answer, it's easy to wipe off with wipes, and it's not going to damage the tablet. So that's an easy way of doing it. So these are some options that you may look into. So this is just about filling out forms, especially now that you may, aside from the typical dental form that you have, that you're having patients fill out, and your medical questionnaire. Now you may have an additional form for COVID, just like what Noel had asked, because you get asked this verbally in banks, or in some stores that have you been out of the country and things like that. So it's going to be in a similar format, except that it's initialed, just for filing purposes. And so there's going to be more forms to be filled out, and you have to make sure that you're ready for this. And bottom line is that whatever you choose, you always have to consider security. So we're not just after the health of the patient, but also the confidentiality that's involved with what you're doing. So that's the first thing. Now, let's say you're done with that. What's the next thing? What's the next step in the office that you usually do? You check in the patient, and you inform the back. Now, we understand that there's going to be limitation with staff. Maybe there's just a dentist, the dentist, and the assistant, and then the receptionist there. And so there's not much. There's not a lot of people. So you can actually communicate, run to the back, and say, hey, the patient is here, blah blah. But like, you would want to eliminate those things, because you want to observe physical distancing as well, right? So now there are options for instant messaging. I know James had touched on this like maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, about instant messaging. So if you don't have that, then that's something that you may want to look into as well. And again, so I don't have to elaborate on what instant messaging is, but you have to make sure that it's secure, because there are a lot of instant messaging platforms out there that are web-based and that are free. But again, similar to the email that I mentioned earlier, they may not be totally secure. So make sure that whatever you're getting is secured, it's within the network, and you have control over what's being communicated, in between people. So that's with the instant messaging. Now, another thing that you may have to look at would be paper charts. We've already spoken to, not just myself, but the rest of the team here had implemented the like offices during this time to go paperless, because they had anticipated that this is the best time to do it. This is the best move, because just like what I mentioned with your medical questionnaire, that how will you disinfect these paper charts, right? So yes, you will have air filters, additional air filters, like in every corner of your office. You will have new vacuum systems in front of the patient's mouth, but are you 100% sure that there's no aerosol or any type of bacteria that's going into these papers, right? So, but we're not saying that it's free of bacteria, but that it's easy to wipe off. Like if it's digital charting, then what you're using is like you're using your keyboard, to type, and you're using your mouse to click, or you have a touch screen to put in your notes and to update your odontogram, and then once you're done, wipe it off. It's easy, right? And then when it comes to billing, it's easy as well, because that will be automatically relayed to the front, when your front desk can bill it themselves, or from the back, you guys can bill it from the back as well. Now, that's with the paper chart, so something to think about in this time. And another thing now, or maybe my last point would be the payment. Like, how are you gonna there's another hard surface, high touch point item, which is the pin pad, right? The point of sale machine. So I've heard that like, yes, it will be useful for a lot, but then I've heard for some cases where, you know, it's a high price amount of treatment, and let's say the patient portion is, let's say it's a lot, let's say $500, and then they would say then you still have to touch it, and then you can use your tap. But then there are other options to that, right? Like, let's say Interact Payment, PayPal, or other sources. There's so many things out there now, so we just have to be resourceful, right? That would make it easier for both yourself and also your patients. And with regards to the point of sale limit, I mean, that's it's not the end of the world. Like, that can be increased through their financial institutions. So these are the things that you can incorporate with your already have in place IPC protocol, like what Noel mentioned, like the arrows, or having signs and having sanitizers and things like that. But this is the procedural items that needs to be considered. So yeah, so something to think about. So that's it for me. Maybe Alex, you have something to add about? I forgot to mention the details of why it's important to have these communications sent to the offices or vice versa to be in a secure way.
Sure. Well, first of all, I always have something to say, so that's nothing new about that. So there are a few aspects here that are very important. The ability to communicate in a secure way identifiable health information is crucial. The cyber attacks during this time of pandemic have increased, and we want to make sure that as a custodian or as an agent, an employee of a custodian, we are applying the right principles and the right protocols to minimize the risk and to make sure that we do what we actually need to do, safe keep the data in a way that makes sense and is reasonable. So whether you are communicating within the office, like Jay mentioned, with regards to the instant messaging, 100% it needs to be in a way that is secure, not exposed to the general public, to the internet. So you can't really use Facebook Messenger or even Teams, just because that information resides outside of your office, outside of your control, and you have no control over any encryption or who has access, which are both pillars in any type of privacy or health information act throughout the country. So I think it's very important to understand, don't just use the tool because it's convenient. You have to consider privacy regulations and best practices and the right policies for your office. I think that's extremely important. And I know Patricia on the YouTube channel chat asked about they have one washroom when it comes to both staff and patients, and how is that going to work? And the answer to that is, well, it increases the risk of cross-contamination, right? So you can have a patient waiting in the car just so they're not in the waiting room, but if they're waiting 15, 20 minutes, it is likely that they would at some point want to use the washroom. Also, dentists who are doing procedures that are aerosol producing, maybe not now, maybe in a month, maybe in two, they're going to have to, before they use the washroom, they're going to have to remove all of their PPEs, get into some new PPEs potentially, and then do their visit to the washroom. It's going to be challenging, on top of the fact that someone's going to have to sterilize the washroom after every person who uses it. That's kind of the interesting part of it. Now, I know of offices that are in a high rise where they have staff washrooms that are behind, behind all the ops and kind of in the back, but their patients are using washrooms that are kind of communal with regards to the floor where they're at. That is even more challenging because the patient might be there waiting for a procedure or finishing a procedure, and they might be removing some PPE, but patient PPE is not as protective as probably some of the clinicians. They might be carrying some of those aerosols into that communal washroom. So all of these things need to be taken into consideration, and I think the whole premise of the new IPAC and all of the things that we're looking at, even reducing touch points with hard surfaces, is we want to treat the situation as if the clinic is contaminated, which is what all of the clinicians have been trained for in their schooling and in their everyday work. They've been working in an aerosol producing environment with viruses and bacteria since aerosol producing procedures have first been implemented. So I think that if anyone has been trained in that, it's them. It's just this particular virus doesn't have a vaccine yet, doesn't have a cure, and is highly contagious, and is also has a lot of carriers that are asymptomatic. So this is why you just base all of your protocols as if every patient or employee that is coming into the office is a carrier. And if you're able to develop the policies having that in mind as a foundation to everything, then you're able to create the new patient flow, and you're able to create the right protocols for your office to keep everyone safe, but also make sure that your patients are getting the oral health treatment that they require. So I think that's kind of my contribution to this topic. There's just so many things to contribute and consider in this situation, that a lot of deep thought must be put into this type of consideration. And I'm seeing that Patricia is saying that it's exactly the building bathroom facilities. So you need to speak with the landlord and figure out how there's proper sterilization protocols with regards to a communal washroom facility. That's something, that conversation needs to be had almost right away, whether you're already allowed to open or not, just to make sure that you're able to have some sort of a control over the IPAC standards within those facilities, because you're going to have people going into the facilities and back into your clinic throughout the entire day. So I think it's very important to make sure how you control that. So I think with that, and this topic is just now, becoming mainstream and a buzzword, reducing these touch points with hard surface, and I think this is going to be capitalized more and more throughout the industries as we move forward. So I want to move the spotlight to our friend James here, who's been pretty quiet throughout all of this. He's going to talk to us about a dentist that has actually shown all of their preparation and how they have been addressing some of the challenges with coming back to work, and he's going to share that experience with us.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, guys. I appreciate that. Just to follow up, like each week as we kind of go forward, I noticed the trend that we're becoming a little bit more and more specific into some of the conversations that we've been having. And when we were talking about touch points, like Jay had elaborated on there, It's much more than just the conventional things that we've been talking about before. And like I said, even with Alex speaking on that matter as well, all these things need to be considerations, because it's easy to think about what's going on in the office, and then when you get into the office and you see all the areas again for yourself that can be touched, or all the areas that you may not have thought about, it's good to put this all into your plan. And that's kind of where I'm going today here, is talking about those reopening plans, because more and more conversations, obviously over the last 2 weeks, as everyone's slowly starting to get into the groove of either getting ready for their launch date, or offices that have been slowly already open. It's been interesting to hear there's been, very different opening approaches, as Alex had mentioned as well earlier. Some offices are basically doing all the minimum requirements that they need to make sure that they're back into production as quick as possible. And I've had a few offices that are planning on staying closed a little longer, just to make sure that they can kind of ride out whatever wave that might come next, and have the best possible patient experience that they can for their patient base in the meantime. So for us here, and we had a big discussion this week and a big meeting on starting to create basically a COVID toolkit and a checklist of items that we're collectively getting from all of the offices, and eventually, when this gets put together in the next short while here, that we will obviously share that with you as well, because we want to make sure that if there's things that we're hearing that you're not necessarily grasping based on a very light guideline that you might be getting or might be reading online, we want to make sure that everyone's points and is shared basically with everyone, so everyone has an opportunity at that point to see for themselves if they're missing anything. And again, even on our list, if we send something off and it's missing things, please send us that information, because we would love to share that with the rest of the dental community. One thing that Alex had mentioned here was there's been a video that's been put out. We had it shared with us, and we watched it over, and I think it's really good to share with all you guys. Reason being is, again, a visual representation. We talk about all the things that we need to go through, and I'm just going to kind of give a quick synopsis here on the video itself, but I do encourage you afterwards to take a look at that video, and to kind of see and imagine for yourself if some of these ideas that this clinic is put into place make sense for you too. Then it does make sense. But this clinic is obviously taken the COVID pandemic very seriously, in the sense that it's patient and staff health above anything else. But they did some really great stuff in the video, and I do want to show just kind of illustrate quickly what kind of took place. So when the doctor was reopening, he was out in the hall, and he kind of simulated what it would look like for him and staff and his patients to be walking into the office. Now, later on, I'll mention that there's a separate entrance for staff, but generally it's the introduction into his office and how everyone will be flowing through. And after a brief intro, he basically was showing, like I said, how those patients are now going to walk in on the first day versus how they've been walking in over the years at that practice. One key thing that he brought up right away, and it's in the mentality now that there's new changes, new protocols, and new patient flows, as patients will have to adapt to the new patient intake procedures that we have to go through in the time being, to make sure that we minimize as much contact with everyone as possible, and everyone leaves just as safe as they came in. He goes over how to wait outside, how patients will be waiting outside the office, and how they'll be notified. He mentioned that you could be sitting in your car. They might just send you a quick text to say, hey, it's time for you to come in. Once in, he explains how the front lobby and the front area is going to work. So there's a sign out front that basically welcomes the patient in and illustrates basically what the procedure is going to be. When the patient walks in, there's a screening process immediately with forms. They call it the wellness form. They want to make sure that everything is good with the patient. They make sure that they can fill that out right at the station. Now, in the video, it kind of illustrates like a paper copy. But again, we've talked about here about even having a tablet or a digital copy with the fill-in forms. That can be a lot easier for both staff and the patient, because it's a lot easier to clean a touch screen than it is paper. The patient will be given a mask right away, and they will have their temperature taken with a digital thermometer. Once that point happens and they take their next step in, there's a touchless hand sanitizer. So basically, you just wand your hand underneath. It gives you the shot of hand sanitizer. And right beside that station, we all kind of talked about this earlier. It's kind of neat. It's a box where you can step into it and step in medical booties. So for some of you, obviously in the industry, you have known that is or has been available. It was just, I've never seen that in a dental office before, so I was kind of intrigued how he had all that lined up. But it's kind of like a one-stop lineup shop that you're just getting all your stuff done all at once. And then it pans out into the waiting room. And within the waiting room, in the video, it shows that there's couches. Now, I know a lot of offices have chairs, right? So even when I went to get my haircut the other day, it was the same thing. It was every second chair was taped off. So that could be an option for you. You could easily remove chairs and socially distance them as well, whatever is going to make sense. I know we touched on that a little bit as well earlier. But again, he made the point of if anybody needs to be in there for any longer than they need to be, that at least that protocol is underway. And I thought it was neat that they have a portable HEPA filter in the waiting room as well, to make sure that that anything that can be filtered through is filtered through before they actually step into the office itself. And yeah, that was basically the snapshot of the entrance and walking in. So next steps are staff's going to welcome them into their appointment. Depending on hygiene or resto, they'll be taken to the appropriate room. Now, the hygiene ops in the procedure rooms, they have aerosol capturing devices above the patient as they're doing their treatments. You'll see that in the video. I've never seen like a vacuum suction type device before in a dental office. Maybe that's just the dental offices I've gone to. I just haven't seen one before. But with that being said, though, obviously that is going to be a heavy consideration for a lot of offices, especially when you're treating like bigger offices as well, and you're treating so many people. But you want to make sure that if that is something that you can implement, it only makes the most amount of sense to implement. And then the doctor walks out of that room, goes into a treatment room where the patient will rinse with peroxyl, do a pre and post rinse as well, and be given instructions. And then he also walks through the payment processing as he's trying to get it set up online as soon as they can. We've also talked about with Jay there when he was going into the POS system. I'll touch on that in a couple minutes. But again, that is obviously a heavy consideration as to how you want to take your payments going forward. As the doctor flowed through, he went into the surgery rooms. They call it a CPR room, the Corona Prevention Room. And the Corona Prevention Room is a divided room with a zipper door. All entrances that I could see in the background as he was kind of moving the camera, they seem to be all taped off with plastic barriers. And it seems to not be like all the rooms, but any open door that would be in the room. So say a sub room, a closet, anything like that, they have a plastic, just like painting plastic. You know what I mean? It just looks like it's taped on, just again as another fail-safe to make sure that nothing's transpiring in or out of those rooms. They have HEPA filters in there, and they've also created a side room for all the PPP that's needed for the office, so it can all be in one spot and people aren't going and sourcing it in other spots and possibly moving germs around at any point in time too. So it just makes it a one-stop shop for where they want to get all their PPE, sorry. As the camera kind of walks through back into the front area, there's sneeze guards, of course, all in the administrative area when they were doing the tour through, and staff members, like I mentioned earlier, this is where it points out the staff members, they come in through a separate room through the back, and they actually go through the same sanitization measures that a patient would go through before they enter or each time that they have to leave. And from what I understood from the video, it kind of seems that that's pretty mandatory. They also take deliveries. Now, obviously, every office is completely different, right? You've got all different sizes. And again, like Alex had said before when we were talking about the deliveries, what do you do if you only have a front door, right? So how they had it in the video was the delivery came in through the back, and it is actually put into a separate room. It's almost like a dividing room between the office, like the hallway is to where it was coming in from the office, and then another door before the office begins. They put HEPA filter, from what I understand, in there. It almost looked a little bluish, so I couldn't tell if there was a UV lamp in there. But basically, they were sanitizing the best that they could their packages and deliveries before. And I'm assuming, because he doesn't talk about it, but I'm assuming that there's going to be a time limit on that after an hour, a timer shuts off, you can go in and get your mail, I'm assuming. But that would only make sense if someone had the capacity to do that would be a great way to implement that extra space, especially for that. Now, if you have a front door only entrance, and I was trying to think about this as we were going through the webinar today, it seems that most offices that I've been to or I know, it's almost like there's an immediate closet. You might want to use that closet maybe for a delivery type station. Maybe it makes sense to kind of follow what this person's doing or look online to see if there's any way that you can sanitize those packages other than wiping them down. There's lots of different things out there, but again, you got to be cost effective, and you got to also understand the limitations of the space that you have available to you as well. So again, I just wanted to touch on that because it kind of made sense in the sense that, yeah, if you have the space, do it. But then when you look at most offices, I don't know if it's always feasible, but you should have a plan. And this should be something that is discussed when you're talking about bringing those patients back in. And just to kind of finish off here, just going over those touch points that Jay was going over as well, from talking to offices, like the chairs, if anybody needs to sit down in the front area, they're looking at those paper disposable coverings or anything where someone could sit on that and then they can immediately dispose of that. Sanitizing with disinfectant obviously is probably the easiest and quickest choice. And then that way, again, it's a little bit more environmentally safe in the sense that you're not using up a bunch of paper. The POS, the tap, we've talked about this a few times, but again, you got to push the importance of this because that is probably one of your number one patient touch points. But you also need to get paid for your work at the end of the day. So it's a very important key factor in the whole patient flow throughout the office from beginning to end, right? We've talked about, looking at going digital for some clinics and setting up an e-transfer account, which might make it easier for the patient just to e-transfer you that information at the point of sale. Again, that needs a little bit discussion on your side too to see if that's feasible and something that you want to do. And again, with us, with our company, we offer integration to POS to make it very easy to be able to push that payment directly to the PIN pad. And for the patient just to use tap if possible, to be able to not touch that. The paper side, we've talked about the digital charts, how that's been a huge factor for our talking points with offices over the last few months. We've had some discussions with the HR tools that we have in Maxi Manager. We've got Maxi Reminder as well that will deal with all your patient communications without having to touch anything. Secure Send integration that we now have as well. That is a complete help to all offices out there. And I do suggest that the offices that we're speaking to, that we start speaking on that and trying to have a more broad conversation on the security of what you're sending. Now, we also talked a little bit about emails. Jay brought that up. I know Alex was touching on that as well. And again, just to talk about what we spoke on a few weeks back was that we're still developing our patient portal to allow these things to happen. Again, it's being developed. As much as we want to push timelines and things like that to accommodate everyone, there's a measure of security that we can't fail ourselves or fail you or fail a patient at any point in time. So that development process and that research and testing, that needs to be solid before we introduce a tool like that. We are working on it. So again, that's something to key in on. And we're talking to offices already about interest in that once that comes available. And cloud backups, doing manual backups, even that type of touch point where people are touching external drives or USBs and things like that, and having your data on site versus just having it in a cloud backup, and reducing the threat and having everything automated for you. So it's just a non-factor in what you're touching as well. So all of these things all push together into the same message. We definitely want to have bigger and broader conversations with all of our offices, and even for clinics that aren't with Maxident as our software. If you have challenges, please reach out to us. We definitely would love to have the conversation with you to, brainstorm. Let's talk about what's going on, where we can help, and get you all the right information to get you going as fast as possible, but doing it in the most safe manner that we possibly can.
Awesome. Thank you very much, James. This is very good. And I shared the link to the video of the dentist and the tour of his clinic. But everyone who's watching, please feel free to watch it after we're done with the broadcast and not right away. But yeah, there's a lot of things, and James touched upon the human resource aspect of it, and I think the majority of offices are still using either digital tools that were not built specifically for dental clinics, like Google Calendar to organize their shifts. But a lot of offices are still using traditional, paper-based schedules, the ones that are hung, in the staff room, and think about changes that are made to that schedule throughout the shift, where aerosols can be present. And I'm not even, we always talk about patient files, but what about employee files? Those are almost always paper, and as such, although they're being touched much less, are not being taken into the op, but they are being taken to the back office for the office manager or the dentist. And the ability to digitize all of the aspects of human resource, take all of the policies that you have and digitize them in one place, and make sure that you have a trackable mechanism to make sure that staff has read an update to a policy. Think about just how many policy updates you're going to have in the next 3 to 6 months as things reopen, as the second wave hits, as there are micro outbreaks in particular areas, and what people learn from research. There's going to be a ton of policy updates, both on the employment side, both on the IPAC side, on the privacy side potentially. All of these things are a moving target, and they're going to change quite frequently. So having a mechanism to make sure that all of your staff has read and having documentation of that, all of the changes to the protocols and policies, is going to be huge in helping you minimize risk in case something happens. So take advantage of the tools that are available, that were actually built specifically for the purpose of dental clinics. So I think that's very, very important. So my topic, I'm a big supporter of traditional marketing for dental clinics. I've been speaking to clinics for the last probably 4 or 5 years, coaching them specifically on traditional marketing, how it's not all about your website and not all about your social media posts or selfies with a patient on Instagram, but more so the fact that you're able to make real human connection, ranging from inviting a Santa to your office running in a nice summer day, taking advantage if you're a storefront in a strip mall, taking advantage of your parking lot and having a bouncer ready and some hot dogs or whatnot, to even new offices or offices that are struggling with new patients and asking the dentist and staff to just go and knock on doors and just introduce yourself to the people in your surrounding areas. And offices have done this with great amount of success. And in today's world with the pandemic, all of these things are now not really feasible with the physical distancing that public health is enforcing and is requesting us to uphold. So the thing is, I don't think that this traditional marketing is dead. I think it's all going to go back where it is for two reasons. One, they're going to find a vaccine, and two, we're social creatures. So there's a limit to how much we can live in isolation and use technological tools. And people will go and they will interact and they will have fun together in person because that is ingrained in us as individuals through evolution. So I think that is going to still be a big component of proper marketing and relationship building with your patients. Having said that, that's going to take a while, and as such, I think it's very, very important to be able to focus on digital marketing and the aspects of promotion of your clinic and all of the things that you're doing in response to the pandemic, and how much you care about your patients and your community around you, and leveraging digital tools to do it, whether it is your website, whether it's broadcasts like these that you can do for the general public, whether on YouTube or other platforms. And I think it's all about how you're able to engage with your patients around. Now, for the dental community, I know for a fact that there are dozens of educational webinars every single day that are available to you. I have dentists complaining to me that they have 3 or 4 webinars a day, and sometimes they have to pick and choose and just not attend a few because they just feel so exhausted about the education that they're getting from so many angles. The regular people don't necessarily have an abundance of webinars and educational outlets that they can leverage for their own self-improvement. And I think that being able to use those to showcase your personality and the fact that you really care about your patient, that you educate them on these things, but not only on these things, is very important. And I think it's something that you should definitely take advantage of, on top of staying in touch with your staff. Whether I was posted on one of the other webinars, and one of the questions to the audience is how do you stay in touch with your peers, with your colleagues? And the vast answer was basically a WhatsApp group. And I think it's beautiful because you can have video calls, but you can also kind of text each other and text pictures of where are we catching you, or is it a nice day outside that you're with a cocktail in the backyard, or is it raining and you're cuddling with a comforter and a hot glass of chocolate milk or whatnot. But those are opportunities to connect better with your colleagues and share some of your concerns. It's a very, very good opportunity for the leaders of practices, whether office managers or dentists, to be able to show leadership and to communicate everything that's being done in the clinic in a way that is just down to earth, and just work with the feedback of your team to make sure they feel safe to come to work. Because we mentioned this during this broadcast, there are dozens, hundreds, maybe even thousands of hygienists and assistants in Canada that are absolutely terrified from coming back to work. So I think that it is the duty of people who lead the offices to make sure that they communicate their plans and make sure that their team feels safe. Because if your team doesn't feel safe, your patients will not feel safe as well, and that's going to be to the detriment of you trying to build trust with your patients and even with the staff. So those are kind of my points on both traditional and actually digital marketing. I think that marketing as a whole in general, clinics are going to still be needed. We all have our needs for teeth, and it's better to be proactive and start incorporating changes to your clinic now based on the things that some have guidelines, but for the people who don't have guidelines, still start embarking on a change and building the new processes and the patient flows in a way that makes your staff feel safe. Once you're able to do that, the changes to fit the guidelines within your jurisdiction are going to be smaller, rather than you're going to get guidelines and have to do all of this from zero. So start trying to get ahead of the curve, and hopefully you'll be able to be properly prepared and just get to a point where staff and your patients feel safe within your clinic, given the high amount of risk that there is in the majority of dental procedures as they are being performed today. So yeah, so that's all for me, guys. Do you have anything you wanted to add at this point? Okay, awesome. So again, everyone, thank you very, very much for joining us this Friday. I hope that you guys got something, even if it is just this little interaction between us here. We will gladly welcome you here next week. We'd love to see you. Feel free to subscribe to this channel just so you can get notifications of when we go live and when we upload new videos. Feel free to share the stream or the channel amongst your friends just so we can get exposure to more and more people. I want to thank specifically Patricia today for your interaction through the chat. Always a pleasure. Hopefully we were able to be helpful with your questions. That's it. Thank you very much, and we look forward to not really seeing but interacting with you next week and every week after that. Thank you very much. Have a great long weekend ahead, and we'll see you on the other side of next week.